In times gone by, the tribes of the Fiji were often at war. And so they built their villages high up in the mountains on stilts, and they fortified them so they would be protected. It's a natural human reaction. When we are threatened, we do what we can to protect ourselves. And we build walls around us to keep other people out and to keep ourselves in. It's a perfectly human reaction. In one of those villages, there lived a storyteller, a very famous storyteller. And as the custom was, he was given food and gifts by people who appreciated his stories. One man who especially loved the stories was a humble eel-catcher. And he knew that because he had nothing really of value to offer, that he was limited in what he could give as a gift to show his appreciation. But he decided he would do what he could with what he had and his abilities. And so one morning he left the village, followed a mountain stream up through the lush jungle, until he came to a picturesque pool where fresh water was bubbling from the earth. And he said to himself, surely this is the place where I can find beautiful prey, a nice eel. And so he waded into the water, and he felt around under the water in the banks until he found a hole that he thought was appropriate. And he put his arm all the way into the hole until he felt something. Now, he was an experienced eel catcher, and so he'd done this before. And he was sure that he had something that was worth something. But I have to tell you that this eel catcher was in for a surprise. So when he pulled his arm out with what he had in his hand, it was not, as he had anticipated, a plump, juicy eel, but a small, human-sized spirit god. And he said to himself, this is wonderful. A spirit god would make a much more valuable gift for the storyteller. This is what I will give as my gift. He was elated, but the little spirit god was not quite so, he didn't share his enthusiasm, shall we say. He was a little uncertain about what was going to happen to him, and so he started pleading for his life and bargaining with the eel catcher. And he said, tell you what, let me go, and I will give you a more valuable gift than anything you've ever had before. I will give you the power over fire. The eel catcher thought. That would be something, because he knew that none of the villages around had fire, nor did his. And he reasoned, because he was ahead of his time, he reasoned that with fire they could cook their food and warm their huts. They could clear the jungle to raise crops and even harden their spearheads. And so he agreed to accept the gift. And the little god then directed him to dig a big pit and fill it with river rocks. And on top of the rocks, to build a huge fire of logs. And the eel-catcher did as he was told, and he sat back and watched as the fire blazed up and burned all the way through from a gray ash to the heat of a cooking fire, all the way through to a white, hot rocks. And at this point, the little spirit god stepped forward, and he took one step and then another, and he started walking across those hot rocks. And then he turned to the eel-catcher and said, "Come on, follow me." Well, you can imagine the eel-catcher's reaction. He was scared. Of course he was scared. He had never walked on hot rocks like hot coals before. He'd never seen anybody else do it. He believed when the little god told him that he now had the power over fire. He wanted to believe that, but he couldn't help but doubt it, and he was afraid. But he had the courage to try. In spite of his fear and the uncertainty and the doubt, he took a step forward and another. And lo and behold, he discovered something. He could do it. He discovered that he could do things that he had never thought he would be able to do before. And he was elated with this discovery. This was the gift that he was going to take back to his village. Now, one thing you need to know about the eel-catcher is that he was not selfish. He was not possessive. His first thought was not what I can do with this for myself, but how I can share it with my village. And that's exactly what he did. He presented himself with this gift to the storyteller and to all his villagers. And they began to use fire for all the reasons and more that he had anticipated. And he knew with the fire they would be secure and wouldn't be afraid of all the other villagers attacking them, because none of them had the fire. And so it was that he and the storyteller and all the villagers lived at peace and security. And the eel-catcher himself became a storyteller of sorts, at least with one story, because he shared that story and what it meant with his son, who in turn shared it with his son, and so on. And that story has persisted down through the ages in an unbroken lineage. That's a good story. And I thank you for listening.